Welcome to week 3 of Walking into Wellness. Today's lesson is about modifying recipes for healthier results. Let's get into it. You might have a favorite recipe that you'd like to incorporate into your new meal plan, and we're going to talk about some different ways today that we can make that meal healthier, whether that's through reducing carbohydrate content, reducing or changing fat content, salt reduction, or increasing fiber. Some recipes can be modified easily, but others might take several tries before they're acceptable. To make your experiments more likely to be successful, change only 1 to 2 ingredients at first, and then make adjustments one at a time throughout your experiment. Definitely don't plan to serve this for family gatherings or for corporate parties or work parties. You want to try these at home first before you have other people try them. And these attempts might take more than once, so make sure to give it a few tries. And baked goods are more difficult to modify based on some of the contents of the food. What are some ways to make a recipe healthier? Well, let's talk about it. You can substitute items, maybe something that's lower in fat, higher in fiber, lower in sugar, or lower in calories. You can reduce or eliminate an ingredient like fat or sugar. You can add an ingredient that adds desired nutrients or a desired flavor or fiber. And you can prepare foods differently using different cooking methods. Let's first try to consider how to reduce carbohydrates in your recipes, since starch and sugars can affect your blood glucose. When we talk about ingredients containing carbohydrates, what are some ingredients that we're talking about in your recipes? When I talk about ingredients containing carbohydrates, I'm talking about foods like flour, sugar, honey, syrup, fruit, juice, starchy vegetables, dairy foods, candy, rice, and pasta, or any other carbohydrates containing food. Sugar provides texture, taste, and structure to baked goods, so cutting too much can be a bad idea. Start with a reduction of a half a cup and then cut by another quarter of a cup to a third of a cup each time you adjust the recipe. Cakes and cookies might not handle a sugar reduction as well as quick breads. You can add a sugar substitute to add a sweet taste back, but it will produce a different desired texture and moistness. Splenda for baking works, but it does contain some sugar. The final product will have about 3/4 less sugar than what was in the original recipe. However, by doing this, some people do state that they have an aftertaste. For drinks, salads, cheesecakes, and other foods that only need sugar for sweetness, not structure or moistness, using sugar substitutes to replace all sugars does work well. Adding sweet tasting spices like cinnamon or nutmeg or extracts like vanilla or almond are also ways to help you use less sugar. Other substitutes for higher sugar foods are canned or frozen fruit that is unsweetened in its own juice or light syrup that is sweetened with a sugar substitute. Also, light juices that have a sugar substitute added to them, like cranberry juice, can be used for beverages. Sugar-free pudding and gelatins work well in salads and desserts. Lower sugar fruit spreads can be used as toppings on cheesecake and angel food cake and to make sauces for meat, fish, or poultry. Of course, these products are not totally carbohydrate free, but they do cut the sugar. Here's a few examples of how to reduce your carbohydrate content. You can substitute non-starchy vegetables for rice, pasta, or potatoes. You can replace some or all, for example, by replacing half of the potatoes and scallop potatoes with broccoli florets. You can bread one piece of meat, fish, or poultry. You can top casseroles with a thin coating of chopped nuts. And you can dilute juice with water, diet soda, or seltzer. Now let's consider ways to modify your fat intake. This is very important for people that have chronic diseases such as diabetes because it increases your risk for heart disease and stroke. Also, fat has the most concentrated calories, and many people with chronic diseases like diabetes are trying to control their weight. Fat in recipes can be handled in two ways. You can change the fat to a healthier choice, which might not change the calories, or you can cut the fat and reduce your calorie intake. One example of cutting fat, particularly in baked goods, is to use half the butter, shortening, or oil and replace the other half with unsweetened applesauce, mashed bananas, or prune puree. Typically, people change the fat in their recipes for a few reasons. First, to reduce the harmful saturated and trans fats that increase your heart disease risk. Second, to increase their intake of healthier unsaturated fats that might reduce your risk for heart attack and stroke. Replace solid fats like butter, shortening, stick margarine, and bacon or fatback with liquid vegetable oils or tub or liquid margarine. Replace cheese with nuts and avocado on salads. Top cereals, pancakes, and waffles with chopped nuts in small amounts. And use oil and a flavored vinegar with a packet of sugar substitute for a healthy salad dressing rather than high sodium, high sugar, or creamy salad dressings. You can replace solid fats in baked goods with oil in some cases. To be sure that baked goods don't turn out too oily when oil replaces shortening, butter, or other solid fats, cut the total amount of the fat called for in the recipe by a quarter. For example, if the recipe calls for 1 cup of shortening, you can use only 3/4 cup of oil. Often you can cut the fat in recipes by a quarter to a third without causing too much change in texture and taste. In some cases, you can omit the fat completely, like not adding the margarine or butter to foods like macaroni and cheese dinners and potato and rice mixes. Often you can cut the fat significantly in a recipe by choosing very lean protein. Ground beef can be very fatty, but if you choose ground beef labeled 92 to 96% lean, you'll cut out a lot of the fat while having less shrinkage. You can also use ground white meat of turkey or chicken. Keep in mind that ground turkey is not default leaner than ground beef, so whichever product you choose, pay attention to the leanness. If you cannot buy that lean, pour the fat off the ground beef after browning and pat dry with a paper towel. You can also skim fat off the top of sauces or stews as the dish cools and fat solidifies. One product you might not have used is evaporated skim milk. It is sold where other evaporated milk is sold in stores. It is a good substitute for coffee creamer, can be whipped if it's ice cold like whipped cream, and it can be used in recipes like desserts that call for cream or whole milk. Now let's discuss ways to cut salt and sodium in your recipes. It is important to reduce salt because most people with diabetes or other chronic diseases also have high blood pressure. Even if you control your blood glucose well, you might be more to develop a diabetic complication if you do not have good blood pressure control. Our bodies learn to like salt. We can also learn not to like it. Anybody want to guess how long it takes to get used to eating less salt? The answer is 2 to 3 weeks. For most people, it takes that long if they consistently eat salt to not miss it. An easy way to start cutting salt is to not salt the cooking water for rice or oatmeal or pasta and vegetables. Now, there are many low sodium frozen and canned foods that are often right next to the regular high sodium versions in the store. Of course, a wonderful way to cut sodium is to use more fresh foods and fewer processed foods. Fresh food from produce stands and farmers markets frequently tastes better and needs less salt to bring out the flavor. Also use fresh meat, chicken, and fish, and fewer processed meats like bacon, lunch meat, and ham. When you're at the grocery store next time, look at V8 for example. You'll see a full sodium version, and then you'll see a lower sodium version, and the taste is often identical. Remember, if low sodium canned vegetables are not readily available where you live, you can drain them using a colander and rinse them under water to reduce the sodium content. Be careful, some meat and poultry that looks fresh in the meat section of the store has brine or salty broth added to make them more tender or increase the flavor when they are lower in fat. To find out, closely look at the small print on the label. Few stores have their own butchers now, so it is done at a central processing plant. It can add several hundred milligrams of sodium. And also buy at a store if they have their own butcher if possible to avoid adding the salty broth. There are several nutrient content claims you might see on packages or pertain to how much sodium is in a product, like sodium-free, very low, or low sodium. Others, like reduced sodium or lightened sodium, refer to the amount of sodium in the product versus the regular version of the product. Keep in mind that a lot of these products might be lower in sodium, but that does not necessarily make them a low sodium food. Make sure to pause this slide to give yourself a really good look at what the different nutrient claims are on food labels. Condiments can add a significant amount of sodium to your food. There are a few lower sodium condiments available like low sodium ketchup that taste just like the regular variety. Reduced sodium soy sauce is not low sodium, but it is lower in sodium. Worcestershire sauce are not too high in sodium, and depending on the brand, hot sauces can be relatively low in sodium. There are also low sodium and reduced sodium pickles. They have sugar in them, so eat them in small amounts. These products often substitute potassium chloride in place of sodium chloride, so anyone with cardiac health issues should check with their doctor before purchasing these products. Two good salt substitutes are wine and lemon juice. Both naturally contain potassium chloride that is used in salt substitutes. Do not use cooking wine because that contains sodium. Some people are reluctant to use wine because they don't want the alcohol, but the longer you cook it in a recipe, the less alcohol that will remain and the flavor will not be lost. Both are good in casseroles and on meat, poultry, and fish. Lemon and other citrus fruits are very good on vegetables. You can also substitute half of the soy sauce called for in a recipe with half wine. Of course, herbs and spices are good salt substitutes, but they work differently. They cover or change the flavor of the food, and they do not enhance the flavor like salt. Therefore, use them lightly at first. Fresh often has a lighter flavor than dried, so you will use less of the dried. Just quarter of a teaspoon dry or 3/4 teaspoon fresh is enough for a recipe serving 4. Another excellent option at many varieties is Mrs. Dash. There are plenty of varieties of salt-free substitutes out there. Give them a look the next time you're in the spices section. Now let's discuss different ways to add fiber to your recipes. Most of the time we are trying to remove a harmful nutrient from a recipe, but in the case of fiber, we are trying to add more. This is because fiber makes you feel more full, won't raise your blood sugar, and if natural, comes with healthy nutrients. And it also promotes regularity. Cooked dried beans, peas, and lentils, also called legumes, are the highest source of natural fiber. They are also considered a starchy vegetable and can substitute for meat since they contain protein. Just 1/2 cup of legumes can have between 5 to 8 grams of fiber per serving. 1 cup of beans, peas, or lentils has 15 grams of carbohydrates, but some of that is fiber which will not raise your blood glucose. Each 1/2 cup also has 7 grams of protein, which is equivalent to 1 ounce of meat, chicken, or fish. The other major source of fiber is other vegetables. All these vegetables can be added to casseroles, soups, and stews to substitute for meat and to cut back on the starches like white rice and noodles and pasta made with white flour. White potatoes have small amounts of fiber, but other starchy vegetables are higher, so eat more of them than white potatoes. While whole grains can be concentrated sources of calories, they are an important part of the healthy meal plan. Substitute whole grain flour for all or part of the all-purpose flour in recipes. Crush or blenderize whole grain cereals to top casseroles or to even coat fried chicken or pork. Substitute whole grain pasta for all or part of the pasta in a recipe. Use brown or wild rice instead of white rice. Use crushed whole grain crackers or whole grain breadcrumbs in meatloaves or meatballs. You can also try some varieties of grains by using them whole, like oats, quinoa, bulgur, barley, farro, amaranth, or millet instead of regular rice, potatoes, or pasta. If using a whole grain is new to you, try adding a small amount of the product that you're used to. For example, mix a batch of brown rice with white rice so it's half and half of each, or start with a smaller amount and work up. Fruit usually has 2 to 3 grams of fiber per serving. Juice has no fiber, so pieces of whole fruit are the best. Cooked fruit sweetened with artificial sweeteners can be used to top waffles, pancakes, and French toast. It can be used as a low-fat, low-sodium sauce on meat, poultry, and fish. 1/4 to 1/2 cup can be added to muffins and other quick breads, so less sugar and fat is needed. Nuts can also add small amounts of fiber. They can be used on cereals instead of butter or margarine, substituted for cheese on salads, used on breads as nut butters, chopped and sprinkled on top of casseroles, or mixed with cooked fruit to top pancakes, waffles, and French toast. In summary, modifying recipes is a wonderful way to change your diet. You can retain old favorites and maybe feel less deprived. If you modify just one recipe per month, in 1 year you can totally change how you're eating. The result may be lower blood glucose readings, lower body weights, and better blood pressure. I look forward to seeing all of you out there tomorrow morning for our walk at 8 a.m. Have a wonderful rest of your Friday.